Hi, Claire.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah,
It's a good Thursday.
you're in a sparkling mood today.
I am. I'm not going to tell you why.
I, I mean, you've already told me why. I think what you mean
Uh,
is we shouldn't tell our listeners why.
maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
um. So we're gonna talk about Love's Labor's Lost today.
I'm excited.
I'm so excited. I'm stupidly excited. I love this play so much, and I feel so bad for anyone in the Sweet Tea community because the longer I spend with your organization, the more they're just going to have to hear me rant about it. But today we're going to do that in a very safe environment, which is in a deep dive. We're going to look at the text. We're going to look at the historical context. We're going to look at the characters and the themes and the language, and we're just going to talk about this play that we love in preparation for a full cast reading that's coming your way soon. Yeah.
That was a surprise. I was surprised right then.
And we're both in it, so we have to. I'm sure that some of our actors will be watching this, so we have to do a good job of like explaining to them that we know our stuff, so that when we get on Zoom with them, they don't think that we're hacks.
You know, I thought for a good long time today about doing this entire session as our motto. And I was really conflicted about it because I'm like, on the one hand, it could be great. And on the other hand, I would give away the surprise.
Yes, and also you
know,
would drive me crazy. I need the AD on the other side of this phone call, not Don Armato.
Perhaps they're both. I resonate deeply with this character. I think he's a. Did I say he's a 7? I think he. No, I can't remember what
you said.
I said. He was a 4.
You said he's a 4.
Yeah.
And I totally like that.
I do think he's moody like a 4. Yeah.
I just find him precocious. So, I don't read the moodiness so much as the just like open-hearted like wonder. He's almost the most childlike character in the play.
I agree with that. And I was looking for the photo of the time that I played him in graduate school.
Was that
and I'll dig it up. Like I have it. I see it frequently, but it's like in a Facebook thing. If I find it, I will screen share during this very call. Oh my gosh. All right, now I have something to do while we talk.
Yeah, give me blackmail material.
All right.
I guess if you're the one sharing it, it wouldn't.
It's from when I had hair, and it makes me a little nervous. But here we go. I'll find it.
Is that the one where you were the matador?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. I wore horns on my head and everything. I think the color pink was involved.
Magnificent. It's what Armato deserves.
I'm going to see if I can find it as we chat. It's going to have to be back in the like this was like early Facebook days.
Well, like, yeah, I mean, you were in grad school, right?
Facebook was like basically just around. Yeah. So if it's on Facebook, it's like way back there at the beginning.
Okay. Well, as Jeremy goes on his scavenger hunt through Facebook's gone by, I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for tuning in today, for joining us. This is going to be sort of simultaneously a more formal version of our podcast, and also it's going to be pretty spontaneous and freeform. Jeremy and I have very different specialties when it comes to Shakespeare and sort of Shakespeare interrogation. He's much better at the history and the context, and I tend to focus on what's actually happening in the world of the play. But we are.
I mean, I like language too.
Yeah, I never said you didn't. I just said that you're better at the other thing.
I know, you just triggered my defensive response. It's fine.
It's gonna be a long day. But we're gonna crack open this play that is at times linguistically baffling, narratively, unsettling, and quite. There's tonal whiplash at the end. It has a very strange ending. I happen to love it. Jeremy happens to love it. But it is perhaps one of the harder Shakespearean comedies to love, at least in the 21st century. So we're going to talk about what the play means to us, and why we think that it sort of still matters today, and why the story resonates with us. So before we... Your brow is furrowed. You just look so intent.
I'm like almost back. I think I'm in like 2005 right now, and I need to get to like 2003.
I wish Kelly were here. Kelly would be able to like would be able to tell us what's going on right now. Like you're manifesting as a
Oh,
5.
there it is. There it is. Oh my gosh. There it is. It just appeared. Oh
Okay,
my gosh.
wow, great.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to share it on my page, and then you can share it with all the people. How about that? I think you're
Honestly,
going to love this
I
photo.
can't wait. I've always kind of wondered
This is a rehearsal photo, not a production photo, so it's a little rough. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
This was before phones knew what they were doing with photos and stuff, but I've just shared it to my timeline. I'm going to share several, in fact. We're going to see how we do. There's another one. I had so much hair and it was glorious.
So, okay, I'm going to try to tug you out of nostalgia land just a little bit because
That's fine.
well, actually, I just need to tug you out of like early aughts nostalgia. I need to send you back to like 1590s nostalgia because that's kind of
fine.
That's where our story starts.
Yeah.
So before I dive into the kind of the bananas plot of this plotless little play, the most important thing to know is that it is a comedy. It is a sparkling little comedy that ends with no marriages and an offstage death of a character and all of the couples breaking up, essentially, barring one. So it has a very unorthodox ending, and the ending can be quite you can feel nonplussed as an
Jarring.
audience member when you get to the ending, because this isn't a comedy like Merchant or All's Well that's quite sort of troubled and perhaps alienating throughout the story. It's pretty lighthearted, broad, witty, repartee based comedy. It's pretty easy to laugh at the antics of the characters in this play, even if you don't always understand what they're saying. So it doesn't feel like a play that isn't going to end, sort of simplistically wonderfully happy. And it centers on these 4 young men in the Kingdom of Navarre, which is part of what is now Spain, sort of the north of Spain. And this young king, King Ferdinand of Navarre, he and his 3 closest friends, who are all under the age of 25 probably, they decide that they are going to become sort of academic rock stars. I don't know how else to say it. They decide that they are going to ensconce themselves away in the Navarre Palace, and they are going to formally abjure all hedonistic pleasures of the world, like alcohol and multiple meals a day and REM cycle and women. Women are perhaps the most important of that oath that they take. So they are going to kind of live ascetically and dedicate themselves to academic pursuits, to study, and they are going to kind of become master scholars in this 3-year what do you call it? Hermitage, I guess, except they're in a castle. So whatever the rich person version of a hermitage is. And sort of no sooner have they made this vow, this impetuous and, very kind of narcissistic vow to become, the academic, the great thinkers of their age. 4 young women from the court of France arrive in Navarre on a diplomatic mission, helmed by the Princess of France, who is, of course, the daughter of the king, who is very ill, and he has sent her on his behalf to negotiate with Navarre about it's a pretty flimsy pretext. It's about this little spit of land called Aquitaine, and they can't decide which of them is supposed to have it, and they're both kingdoms are claiming ownership. So she rolls in with her 3 ladies, and of course the men have to go out and meet them. Why are you pointing at me?
No, I'm just flexing my fingers.
Okay, it looks like you're pointing at me.
No, I would just add there's also debt involved. There's money.
Yes.
Big money.
Big, like rich people money, like the money that you pay for entire swaths of land. And of course the men immediately, the 4 men immediately fall in love with the 4 women. Some of them have met before, and Ferdinand and the princess, it's their first time meeting, but basically there's sparks all around. And while these 8 courtiers are having this hilarious convoluted battle of the sexes, where the men are at first trying to deny to each other that they have feelings for the women so that they can like seem like they're keeping their oaths. And the women are like, oh God, these idiots. But then of course the men end up finding out that the others love the women, and then the women are like, what if we just like played games with them instead of what if we sort of invited their courtship with the intent of mocking it. And so as this battle of the wits is sort of unfolding between these eight young courtiers, there's a whole subplot happening with the characters that are quote unquote kind of below stairs. They're not all servants, but they're certainly not of like the court level. They're not the elites. Don Adriano de Armado is this Spanish knight who's probably also like a merchant and a pirate, maybe. I get the feeling Don Armado has a really long resume that doesn't make much sense. But he's in Navarre to study with the king and his friends. But he also finds himself sort of entangled in a love triangle with a servant named Costard and this like dairy wench named Jaconetta, who of course, has been banished from the palace grounds. So all of this is happening like in the fields outside the palace. Then there are these two scholars who are sort of academic blowhards. One guy named Holofernes, and then Sir Nathaniel, who's like the local like parish curate. And they both are like addicted to Latin, and they just have this really weird, overwrought Dickensian way of speaking where they use so many synonyms and they lace so much Latin into their words that actually everything they're saying becomes incomprehensible. And Armado, Holofernes, Nathaniel, Armado's page Moat, who's kind of one of the few characters in the play with some like common sense, Costard, they all sort of band together at the king's request to put together a play within a play in true Shakespearean tradition for the princess and her ladies. And that play within a play sort of sets up the final movement of the show. So by the end of the play, we got all the characters in one place together, kind of like the end of Midsummer Night's Dream. So that is a pretty sort of that's a boilerplate of what happens in the story. But what's strange about this particular romantic comedy is that as the play within a play devolves into a kind of hilarious spectacle of like a boxing match between Costard and Don Armado over Jaconetta, a messenger comes from France and announces that the King of France has died and the princess is now the queen, and she and her ladies leave Navarre. They go home and they don't accept the men's proposals of marriage because they think that the men have some more growing up to do, and everyone has to grow up sometime. So the ladies go back so the princess can rule her kingdom and grieve, and they leave the men there to rule their kingdom and grieve, and that's the ending. So it's a strange play, and before I get bogged down with the logistics of how that plot unfolds, I would just love it, Jeremy, if you could like first fill in any sort of major gaps that you think I left out, and also tell us kind of what was happening in Shakespeare's world when he was writing this play, and what influences may have informed what we have on the page now.
Okay, I'm going to start at the beginning.
Great.
The very beginning. I'm going to put on my professor hat.
Please do, because I don't have
I wish I had one because I don't. But
metaphorically, I don't even have one.
I'll still talk about the specific historical context.
Great.
But I do want to hit a point that, again, that you have touched on, which is that this is a very strange comedy or a very strange tragedy.
Yeah, sure.
And I think there are productions that will sort of play a more serious tone as much as they can. I think it is hard to do with the lower characters. I've seen those. I've seen characters that play with this sort of like, this is a camp fest, and then it's like a big cut at the end. And all I want to clarify really simply is that's what this play does. That's different than anything else anybody had ever seen before.
Yeah.
And one of my graduate school professors, the late great Frank Sotherington, always said, when you're dealing with a Shakespeare play, you're probably dealing with something that had never been seen before from a literary or theatrical perspective. And so the difference is here is what you point to, which is And I'll sort of take it from the broad strokes. So like, classically speaking, going back to the Greeks and all of that, a tragedy is something that ends in death, and a comedy is something that ends in the opposite of death, which is
Regeneration.
birth.
Birth. Yep.
Yep. So, and you never see birth really in a comedy ever. You never see it, but you see the thing before it, which is coupling. But the implication is that these couples are going to happen and then they're going to go make babies. That's the implied thing. And so tragedies go this way, comedies go this way, and it goes back to, actually, I could do a whole lecture sometime on how that emergence of those genres comes from Dionysus worship.
Yep.
In the ancient Greek world, and the harvesting, the fertility of spring, and the harvesting of the fall. Anyway, that's a side note, but that's part of what's happening here. That's really strange. It's unlike some of the later plays, which we call tragic comedies, which are half tragedies and half comedies, like a Winter's Tale is the definition of that. Cymbeline is also like that.
Yeah.
This is different than those. This is a comedy with a coupling ending that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so I part of the as I talk about this historical context, part of what I want to do is underline that and begin to address the question why. Like, Shakespeare had a lot of choices when he was dealing with material. Why did he settle on this one?
Yep.
And that's actually where I'm going to start. Before I do that, I want to tip my proverbial professor cap to Claire Kimball, who's a grad friend of mine.
Thank you, Claire.
Who helped me last night make sure the ground underneath me was sound. So there is debate about when and whether and how, well, not whether, but when Love's Labour's Lost is written. And there's a real argument to be made that it's written over written over or considered over a 5-year period or a 10-year period. If you take the 10-year philosophy, it may have seen an early performance as early as 1588 by a company of boy actors. So when you hear Claire say these are young couples, there's something about that might make sense. I mean, these are like 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds. So the youth part of this might make sense because of that. Or it could come as late as like 1594.
Yep.
In terms of a first performance. It wasn't published for 3 or 4 or 5 years later. And let's say we take, and there's a very real possibility that the 1588 version was around and it was like repackaged for a court performance in 1594. Like, he had the material that maybe he'd scratched together, but then he reassembled it in some way for this sort of first, maybe like, performance that looks a whole lot more like the play that we have now, if that makes sense. So 1594 is where, like, we don't have all of the stuff that we need to make a definitive timeline, but the general thought here is that 1594-ish is a plague year, and that Love's Labours is a play that's written right out of that, probably, like, as in there was a plague that closed all the theaters and shut everybody up like COVID style. And then as soon as we come out of that, Love's Labour's Lost is sort of ready to go. So there's something there. And part of the dark ending of this play, or darker ending of this play, makes me wonder if that's a factor.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's not the why. The real why of this play and its ending, for me, stems from the idea that this play is partly a response. It's responding to a lot of things, but it's partly a response to an earlier performance of Comedy of Errors. That performance of Comedy of Errors was at Gray's Inn, which is those of you who don't know your London history, here you go, different hat. But like, there's a part of London where all the law schools are. Yeah. It happens. It also, this was later in Shakespeare's career, but it's also like it abuts Shakespeare's indoor theater at Blackfriars, but that theater isn't open yet. but it's University City. You know what I mean? There are law schools, and it was not uncommon for these playing companies like Shakespeare's to take a performance there kind of on command and do some, we're going to do a play. So they did that with Comedy of Errors. And it was a train wreck, that production.
Yeah.
They packed too many people in the house. They were all sort of rude. It was a little unruly.
Not the actors.
The
audience members were rude.
These jerk law students, all dudes.
Let's emphasize that. All young dudes, all university age dudes crammed in a room.
It was not a good experience. And it was such a bad experience that actually the law students the next day put on a mock trial about the prior night to like sort of lambast the company, the playing company, and lambast the play a little bit. And it did not sit well with say Mr. Shakespeare. So here you have this play that is like taking these sort of lawyer figures, these like they're in a different court, but that's kind of how they're operating, and punishing them by not giving them the story that they would otherwise get. And so it's this part of the play is like this sort of exploration of frat boy behavior.
Yep.
And it sort of dangles the in another play that the women that you would first not get, but then get by the end of the play, that boy gets girl thing, and doesn't give it to him as a sort of giant Shakespearean FU to these law school boys. So that's one of the things. That's, for me, it's the biggest thing that Shakespeare is responding to. And then there's this other stuff. So and I'll talk a little bit about Philip Sidney. So Philip Sidney is he died like in 1584, so several years beforehand. And you'd think, oh, what is that guy? This old, like he's a poet. He's a playwright, sort of. It's more like kind of closet drama stuff.
When I die, I want that.
He's a critic.
I want that on my tombstone. She was a poet and a playwright, sort of.
He's a critic. He's really many people regard him as England's first Renaissance critic.
Lit crit.
In the big sense, not in the like, I have something to say about your T-shirt, but in the sort of like, where are we at in this moment? Mm-hmm. And he did that in a work called Defense of Poesy or Poetry, in which he's going to town on this guy named Stephen Gosson, who is a sort of puritanical jerkwad who didn't like theater and thought it attracted the wrong sorts of people and it didn't have any virtues. And Philip Sidney said, I have something to say about that. And he did, but it wasn't published until a couple of years before, 2 or 3 years maybe, before this 1594-ish Love's Labours came out. Yep. And when it was published in 1591, the Defense of Poetry was published in 1591. It set off this whole renaissance. That's not I'm using that term ironically or stupidly, but a vogue of people just writing sonnets all the time.
All the time.
It was the thing. And when Shakespeare went on plague year, he was writing either sonnets or, in this case, like long poetry. This is the time he's writing Rape of Lucrece and whatever his other long play is that's escaping my head for the moment.
Pilgrim?
But or not long play.
Pilgrim's Passage, was that it?
No, I think it was Venus and Adonis.
Oh, fine.
I may be wrong.
I'm not interested.
But anyway,
he's they don't character.
He's beginning to think about this sonnet stuff, and here's a play, the centerpiece of which really is this sequence where all of these 4 dudes have written a sonnet in honor of their ladies.
A terrible sonnet.
In this, I think Barone's is good actually, but in this, it's like terribly artificial way. If you watch it, it doesn't. This scene is great. It's fantastic. Great. It's spectacular, but it doesn't really. It's really stagey. Yeah. Kind of it's really artificial feeling, and it's because Shakespeare is sort of speaking into that tradition.
This zeitgeist of poetry.
And So you got those things going on, and you've got this other thing going on, which is back to something Claire's mentioned about this little academe that these four people set up. And I will come back to Sydney in a minute, but because Shakespeare's actually responding direct, not just to the sonnet vogue, but actually directly to um, defensive poetry a little bit, and Sydney thinking a little bit. Um, the so one of the things that is in publication at this time is a little book called the French Academy, or in French, l'Académie Française. And it's this little book about these little intellectual societies that form on the continent, mostly France and Italy, where these little cloistered groups of courtiers like do what these people in Navarre are doing. And it's like this, and one of the things that's important to Shakespeare scholars is figuring out what had been published that Shakespeare would have gotten his hands on at the bookshop, and how that reading material seeps its way into the final product. So the thinking is that this Académie Française is something that was sort of in the discussion in London and in England at the time, and would have been something he picked up, and he was trying to toy around with here a little bit. So he's got that in the mix, and that's really kind of the basis of the whole sort of start to the plot, which is these cloistered courtiers trying to do something, and it was about.
It's almost
it was like this.
It's like it's like they're trying to form like a secret society, almost like a super elite. It's like it would be a bit like a screenwriter today finding out that, like, you know, for instance, Yale University has a secret society, and then some like TV writer being like, I'm gonna write a whole like I'm gonna write the 5th season of Gilmore Girls where she like discovers a secret society at Yale. Shakespeare's kind of doing that. With
absolutely, and it's like it's like part of a romantic sort of warrior poet cult. So the idea is you go and study, like we're going to be this really like we're going to almost be monks, and then we're going to go to war because that's what we do when we're 18 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we're going to come back and we're going to go back to study. And that's going to provide some sort of like balance, and it's going to check all of the ideal noble gallantry boxes and all of that. So that's in the mix. I'll go back to Sydney real quickly, which one of the things that Sydney does in Art of Poetry is talk about the importance and the sort of virtue of character exploration, specifically through stock characters. And he's going back to talking about the stock characters like a clown, like a braggart, and lo and behold, we see all of those characters trickle out, particularly in these below stair characters. Each of whom is a sort of callback to the Sydney stuff. It's also callback to Commedia dell'arte, which is Italian stock character thing. But you see, they don't quite fit the type, all of them, but they are informed by the type, certainly. And certainly a character like Moat does that. And Armado is not a sort of traditional braggart, but he's filling those shoes. And so you see Shakespeare playing around with that as well. All a sign that, you know, okay, so he maybe he wrote this draft earlier of this thing, but then as he comes back to this 1594 performance, the soup that he's been swimming in has been this Sydney stuff, has been this sonnet stuff, has been this performance at Gray's Inn that didn't go so well, and these jerk frat boys, and these stock characters, and so he's like swimming in all of that, and out comes Love's Labour's Lost, which is like the making sense of the alphabet soup that he had been swimming in. And that's it. That's all I have to say. I'm leaving.
No, you can't leave. I can't do this by myself.
I'm not leaving. That was a joke.
You're causing me anxiety, leaving. Jeremy. we
do have a question from someone on the Twitter.
We already have a question. Fantastic.
Lane Maker. Yes. Hello, Lane Maker. The question is, what was the opinion of Charles Dickens about Shakespeare?
Oh, just in general?
I will.
Or about
just play? In general.
Oh.
No, I think just in general.
Okay.
You mentioned Dickensian language.
Yes. I guess I did. Yeah. I used the adjective. I wasn't thinking about the dude, but yeah, go for it. You want to field this one?
The answer is I don't know
Yeah.
because I'm
I
Shakespearean
don't
and
either.
not the short answer is I don't know. However, I do know that Dickens is operating at the period of time where Shakespeare is becoming Shakespeare, moving from the sort of like
I'm just
well
gonna crack this
regarded
open.
poet, yeah, well regarded poet to like national genius. It's happening at the same time.
Yes.
And um, yeah, I mean that's what I know. That's you have reached. I've reached the limit. I have read Christmas Carol about 1 million times and once,
That's the one I
and
don't
you have
like.
reached the limit of my knowledge.
I mean, to be fair, I don't like much Dickens. I just like this one. Um,
I love Christmas Carol. I love it. I don't know why. I've seen so many bad productions, but I love it.
I'm seeing a lot about him researching the history of the guillotine in the introduction to A Tale of Two Cities. I'm not saying anything about Shakespeare, but I would like to affirm what Jeremy said. I did take a Victorian literature course in undergrad, and I know that Shakespeare was he was moving from just a sort of beloved writer figure in the English canon to something far greater and more lauded than that. There was if they had a statue of him, it was being gilded in the Victorian age. So possibly he really liked him. I wish that Dickens had read more Shakespeare, particularly the plays with outspoken women, like Love's Labour's Lost. Might have done him some good.
Okay, my job is done. I'm
No,
gonna
your job
just
is
sit here
not. You gotta
drinking and
stop
watching.
saying that. Your job is not done. But that was a valiant sort of effort for round
Oh,
one.
I
So
have
thank you
more
for
to
that.
say. I have more to say actually. I just a quick thing, but like as an example of how he Shakespeare. So one of the things I think is important to know about Shakespeare, period, is that he's a thief, and the genius comes from him taking swimming in this soup and taking this idea and mashing them together and being a genius at sort of stacking all this stuff on top of each other, sort of seeing what it does. Um, and so, as an example of this, and this is something Claire Kimball pointed out to me last night. So Sydney refers to this clown character who's sort of taken on the stage or taken into the image by the head. That's the phrase that gets used a few times. And so in Shakespeare, you have this clown figure who's named Costard, which means it's like slang for head. So you get something interesting there. You have this lower, and I think she's a clown cutout figure, Jacquinetta.
Yeah.
In the play, she's not. I mean, she's based on like a female clown in the Commedia stuff, but she's not really a clownish figure exactly,
No.
or doesn't have to be presented that way. But her name Jacquinetta is Elizabethan slang for the little toilet, which I think is interesting. You know?
Yeah.
But he's like speaking into it's like Shakespeare didn't like love everything Sidney said. And he's not taking it wholesale, but he's like, oh, let me see what I can say back to that. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, I have more to say. I think the whole play is about language. That's the only other thing I have to say. So
it is. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, in so much as any Shakespeare play can be about one thing, I think this play is it is about language from a like a meta theatrical standpoint. Like as we look at just the text of the play play itself is interested in language and in what English poetry is capable of and not capable of, and how it can
and
be
its limits, right?
and its
Exactly,
limits, right?
its limits.
But also the characters are deeply interested in language, and they have their relationship to language actually is perhaps it's our way in as an audience to understanding who they are. So for each character, we can learn about them based on how they speak and their relationship to words. And so, for instance, we get the character with the most lines in the play, which is the King Ferdinand's BFF, Barone, who is kind of a young Benedict prototype in a lot of ways. he's definition of a smart mouth, and
That's good. That's good. I like the Benedict comparison. I like that.
yeah,
Keep going.
um, and Barone is he just can't help himself. He is irrepressibly snarky. So whenever he finds opportunities to crack these, sort of, well, what he thinks are hilarious asides, either to the audience or to to his like bros as they're like watching other things happen. But he comments on the world around him, and he's very sharp and sardonic, and he often rhymes or he finishes rhyme for his friends in a way that sort of allows him to always have the last word and to always sound like the smartest person in the room. And he processes this really, for him, inconvenient love for the princess's BFF Rosaline through a series of monologues and soliloquies in which his relationship to verse and prose and then verse again, it conveys a mind that is like in free fall, like a mind that was like, I thought that this is what you said. I thought that this is how you flirted. I thought that this is who I was, and that like I was impenetrable to like feeling, and like the invulnerability of like perfect rhyme and perfect structure sort of gives way to the panic of like, oh God, I'm in love, which comes out in this like vomiting prose, and then finally he finds his way to this like masterful blank verse in which he's like, oh man, love is the answer. And you can trace his entire character arc through how he wields language as much as in what he's saying. It's how he's using the rhetoric and the literary devices. It's his feelings come through as much as in his choices there as they do in sort of the actions that the character takes. And so the play is, good God, there's a lot of rhyming in this play. There's a lot of rhyming. There's a lot of sonnets. There's a lot of like non-Shakespearean or like not for Shakespeare traditional explorations into other kinds of poetry. Like he plays around with iambic hexameter. He plays around with iambic tetrameter. In the Nine Worthies, I don't even know what they're called, but he's doing weird stuff with poetry in the Nine Worthies scene. The Nine Worthies were 9 sort of great historical figures, and it's a pageant of those 9 figures that the understairs characters decide that's what their play within a play is going to be about. That's what their little pageant.
I need to pause you just to say something totally unrelated.
Oh, unrelated.
So I love this play so much. And I also have like weird like side habits. Like one of the things I like to do is play fantasy football, and I also play Madden on Xbox.
Okay.
And for years, I had teams called the Nine Worthies.
Was that it?
That's it.
God, it's a wonder we get anything done at Sweet Tea Shakespeare. But yes, that would be an example of a of an aside, I suppose. It does. I guess it tells us something about you, Jeremy. But
I'm dainty and delightful.
Yes, the pageant of the Nine Worthies, which is what Armato and Moat and Nathaniel and Holofernes and Costard put together. I mean, it's a disastrous performance. None of them are actors, and they know that going in. Are you going to defend Armato here?
No, I don't. I mean, I think there's every reason to think it might have been disastrous, but I want to be clear that the reason it's disastrous is because those dudes watching it are jerks. Yeah. And part of what that play within a play is doing is calling back to that Gray's Inn performance and saying, "Look at this."
Didn't let me get there. I was on the on ramp to that. But I still also think that like none of those 5 characters strike me as like blokes who would be good at acting per se.
No, I think it's precious in the way that the mechanicals and
it's that kind of vibe. They're pouring their soul into it, but they're not they're not born actors. But yes, as Jeremy said, like what is the only, I suppose, foreshadowing we get that this play may not end as happily as it sort of is seeming to is the fact that Ferdinand Barone and their friends Dumaine and Longaville, these four young men, these four frat boys, they mercilessly mock the performers, like to the point that they're speaking more text than the actors themselves. The play suddenly goes from inviting us to root for these four young couples to shining a really harsh spotlight on the elitism and ego and kind of ignorant cruelty of this upper echelon of privileged young men. And in performance, I think if it's done well, it's an acutely uncomfortable turn in the show. You start to really feel icky about rooting for these young men, even though they have been so funny and charismatic and in many ways endearing up till now. And it is into this debacle of a performance that flies off the rails because of heckling. It's into that the messenger Mercade comes to tell the princess that the king is dead and that, you know, the party's over. Spring break is over. So,
and I just want to say they get what they deserve.
Yeah.
They get, like...
You're very vindictive, aren't you?
They get what they deserve.
Yeah. Which
poetically
is
speaking.
Yeah.
They're just jerks.
They're not just jerks. They're not.
And on a macro level, they're just jerks.
I disagree. I don't think you're wrong necessarily, but I don't think that that's all there is to it. I think that's part of the magic and majesty of this play, is that, like, these characters who in many ways flirt with commedia archetypes, as with most Shakespeare characters, they break those boxes down. They push outside of that, and they find ways to be layered and complex, and we get to see their hearts, even though for most of the play they're either like repressing feelings or this, like, we have this mockery that's coming from their intellectual.
Mm-hmm. I will agree with you, especially with regard to Barone,
Yeah.
Princess of France, and Rosaline, who I think are actual three-dimensional characters. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the jury's out on most of the rest.
Now that is, I mean, it's hard for Dumaine, Longaville, Maria, and Catherine. I feel bad for those four characters because comparatively they get so little text compared to the King, Princess, Barone, and Rosaline. It's almost not fair to compare them, even though they're all in this tier together, just because they have so much less stage time and stage talk in order to, like, help us understand who they are and what they want. And yet, I would argue that Shakespeare leaves enough. I think he leaves a breadcrumb trail that if you follow in a rehearsal setting, you can actually bring to life on stage. You just have to be sort of careful with how you stage, and you have to be really attuned to which lines he's endowing to which characters. I especially disagree with you about Ferdinand. I actually think the king is, like, he's pretty fascinating to me. He's one of the few monarchs we get in Shakespeare, who simultaneously, like, is young and impetuous in a he's just untested in the way of perhaps, like, a young Henry V, right? Like, he's I think of him as, like, 22. His dad has recently died. He's recently come into rule of this kingdom. But also, like, he has no sort of martial interest that is apparent. He has no, we don't hear about any background in war or in battle for him. What?
I think he's pretty jerky, and so martial's not quite the word, but he's very abrupt and legalistic about the territory swap and the debt.
Yeah, but that's
he's a jerkwad.
Oh my God, no, he's not just that. But I would agree with you that he's a lawyer, not a soldier, and that's that's different. We get a lot of monarchs, especially in the history plays, that are very effective as rulers because they're like a lawyer and a soldier, right? Where they have that ability to do the intellectual rhetorical thing, but they also can like pick up a sword and go into battle and do really, really well. Ferdinand doesn't give us any reason to believe that he has that militaristic side to him. He is just like, he is all in for academia. Like, he's a freaking nerd. And he is super elitist and narcissistic about his academic ambition, but like, he is a nerd. And he has like, it's only because he runs a kingdom and has like a palace library at his disposal and all the money he could ever want that he can be like, hey, let's withdraw from like actual human responsibility and just study for 3 years. Like, let's just go to grad school and do nothing else. And write, amazing PhD theses that people will be still quoting hundreds of years later. I think of him as like the law student who like also, I don't know, like was like also did like a triple major in undergrad and in other things. You know what I mean? Like, I just think he loves school. And Dumaine and Longueville have like joined him on that train, either for their own sort of the fact that they are both nerds as well, which I'm sure they are, but also
they're wet noodles. They're just wet noodles. They just do whatever they're told.
I mean, it is interesting that like they really defend Ferdinand's oath and his plan. And the whole first scene is Baron sort of puncturing all of these points in Ferdinand's declaration that they're going to withdraw from the world. He's like, this doesn't sound fun. This doesn't sound like something I want to be a part of. Like, I told you I would study with you for 3 years. Like, I told you I would go to grad school, but I didn't know that part of going to grad school with you in your palace was that like we couldn't see or talk to girls and we wouldn't get any sleep ever and like we couldn't drink alcohol and like, you know what I mean? He's like, though, like, why are you denying me the fun parts of being a student? And Ferdinand's like, because like to be a good student you have to like give up the pleasures of the world. And Longueville and Dumaine, like, they're pretty much on board with Ferdinand's plan. I mean, Longueville's the one who has written whatever it is, what would we call it? The addendum in the oath about how any woman that like is in the palace and like talks to one of the scholars gets her tongue cut out. Like, that was Longueville's idea. And he seems weirdly proud of it. So Dumaine and Longueville they're committed. They're like invested in the pursuit in a way that Baron isn't. And then, of course, when Baron, sort of finally, he exceeds and he's like, fine, I will sign your stupid oath and I'll do this thing with you because you're my friend, I guess. And also living, room and board, free in a palace. I mean, personally, as someone who struggles with rent, I'm like, I would understand that. Like, I would understand giving up some earthly pleasures in order to just live in a palace for free for 3 years. So Baron sort of is like, fine, I'll do it. And then, it puts him in this position of power when he finds out that his 3 friends have fallen in love, because he feels like he has this sense of superiority over them because he was the one who told them what you're chasing after, and the oath that's going to get you there is unsustainable. Like, this ascetic, academic life that you're going after, it was never going to work. And so he kind of unloads on them when he finds out that they've strayed.
And I mean, that's the very thing that hits the theme of the play we're talking about, which is the limits of language. Yeah. These people made an oath with their mouths that they're not willing to keep with the other parts of their being. Mm-hmm. And so there's like the first part of the play is them making these oaths with words. And the second part of the play is them undoing these oaths as best they can with words. Mm-hmm. And so it's a lot about that. Do we have time for me to like go a mile high again and talk about something?
Sure.
Okay. So hello, class. How are we doing? if you have questions, you can put them in the. If it's about Dickens, we're toast.
We're no
Like
help to
anything
you.
else we can do. So one of the things so this is relatively early in Shakespeare's career.
Yeah.
This play. And I will share with you a sort of philosophy of how to think about Shakespeare theater, particularly early on. So 100 years before Shakespeare is around, the printing press is invented in Germany, and it makes its way to England and all of that. And around the same time, first half of the 16th century, thanks to the Henry's tutor, there's a public education system that gets put in place. Yep. So in the public education system is is the sort of context out of which a character like Holofernes emerges. That's who we're looking at. It's heavy study in the classics, specifically Latin and Greek. And they do good jobs. The printing press does a good job, and the public education system does a good job. But like, it's a really new those are really new inventions. Mm-hmm. They haven't solved all of the problems. And so one of the things that the printing press is able to do for the folks who can afford a university education and up through all the way through the court and high to the highest levels of the land is that it makes so you've got the written technology of the language, and then you have the education that goes along with it. Yeah. And so when those things align, I can go to the print shop. If I'm the monarch or whoever in the court, I can order a book, open it up, and I can access that language. And those books or pamphlets or whatever they are that material is creating a renaissance, really, an excitement about the language, about what it means to be English, what it means to have English in your mouth and in your mind. That's happening for the first time, and it does a really good job at it. One of the things I always say is the printing press. Like the entire population of England is illiterate, like functionally illiterate, except for the clergy and members of the court and lawyers and things like that. So let's say this is a ballpark. If you're out there and actually know the numbers, just shout at me, okay? But let's say 95% of the population is functionally illiterate with regard to, like they can operate a spreadsheet in there if they're a merchant or whoever, but they're not like reading poetry. They're or whatever, they're not reading novels or news accounts. They're not doing that. And the education system hasn't gotten to all of them yet. So what you have is this real excitement about Englishness, the language and the identity, and a bunch of people, almost the entire population, who have not accessed who do not have enough education or access to for them to be able to play in that playground. So one of the things that happens is the theaters come along and say, I know a way to solve that problem. And there is a market here for people who can't read or who aren't able to access the education system in the same way as everyone else. So we're just essentially going to provide books on tape. That is the theater experience in Shakespeare's day, is the book on tape experience. You're coming to get the newest ideas read to you. We call the audiences there then audiences as opposed to spectators. You're going to hear a play, not see a play. That doesn't mean that there aren't spectacle things involved, but it's about this experience. It's about learning new words and new ideas and new forms, and all of that being delivered to your eardrums. And so you have a play here that is about that very experience, about the learning of new words and the limits of your own understanding. That plays out in some stuff with Costard. It plays out in everything with Armado, who is a foreigner in this place and doesn't know how the language works. Yep. And it examines with Sir Nathaniel and Holofernes people who are traditionally educated and how they play with language sometimes at the expense of the folks who don't have the
And
access.
sometimes at the
And so it's
expense
playing
of
around
like,
with all that stuff.
and sometimes at the
Yeah.
expense of just sheer intelligibility.
Yeah.
I've read this
They're
one more times than I can
incomprehensible.
count, and I have no idea what they're
Yeah.
saying most of the time. I have to look
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah, and so it's playing around with all of that, and like it's a pure reflection of sort of how the language is working at this time in the culture.
Yep.
The court has it. The educated class, the clergy and the schoolmasters have it, and no one else does fully. And even in those areas, they're still figuring out what the limits are, how far it will stretch and bend, what it means to invent a new word, and see its application sort of play out and cascade over the course of a conversation. So anyway, what I want to hear what I would want everyone to hear is that the theaters of this time are audible printing presses. That is their function in more than we're here to tell stories or we're here to see characters. Their function at this time, even though you get those things, their function at this time is books on tape.
And this play is it's like a banquet for your ears to listen to it. Like
Mm-hmm.
this of all Shakespeare plays. This is a term that I have no historical basis for because I'm a shit historian, but like I've heard of it as the lyric year. It wasn't exactly a year. But it was a time in Shakespeare's life when he was clearly, as Jeremy said, swimming in the alphabet soup of poetry and just thinking about the English language and what it is capable and incapable of, and how story can be manifested and revealed through poetry, and then where poetry gets in the way and actually obscures emotional authenticity. He's thinking about these things in 1594, 5, in there. That area, that general area of his life, 1593, 94, 95. There's probably a string of about 18 months in there somewhere that I think of as the lyric year, because in this time he's not only writing Love's Labour's Lost, he's also penning Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Richard II. 4 plays that are intensely poetical, and they're interested in rhyme. They're quite elegant. He's looking at, we have the first meeting, which is a sonnet in Romeo and Juliet. We have not only literary and rhetorical motifs, but just narrative motifs that are cropping up again and again. Wordplay that we see in across those plays. The idea of faces and being outfaced, and all of the wordplay in there. We see it in Richard II. We see it in Love's Labour's Lost. We have the play within a play, right? We have the pageant of the Nine Worthies, and we have the Mechanicals, Pyramus, and Thisbe play. And with Romeo and Juliet, right, we have a play that just really seems like a comedy until someone dies, and then it becomes this really heart-wrenching tragedy. Of course, in R&J it works a bit better because it happens about halfway through as opposed to in the last 5% of the play, but it's the same idea of in LLL and in R&J, you get sort of lulled into thinking you're in one genre, and then something happens and you realize that genre is unstable, and everything that we sort of assume about the genre is unstable, and actually the world can turn dark at any minute. With Richard II, we have a king who is so invested in the poetics of language, and he has this sort of beautiful, flowery, often as Harloff said, thrasonical way of speaking, that is very much in line with the poetic cadence of these 4 plays, and the plays are just speaking to each other across this quote unquote lyric year. And what I love about Love's Labours in particular is that in addition to being quite performatively satisfying, I've seen one beautiful production of LLL, and I've seen many that have great moments. You can actually hear the difference in maturity in the characters, especially in those 8 courtiers, based on how they talk. And the princess and her 3 ladies, Rosaline, Catherine, and Maria, they have this. They do speak in verse, and they are quite poetic, and they often rhyme with each other. but there's a subtlety and a clarity to their language. They're often funniest in their shortest lines. And so you get something like, for instance, Longaville writing this sort of ridiculous, overwrought sonnet for Maria, and he has the length of the sonnet, and he also has a monologue about her. And so whatever that is, like 22 lines of text. And we end up laughing at him. And then when Maria gets the letter and the gift he has sent her, which is like a string of pearls, she says, this letter and these pearls to me sent Longaville. The letter is too long by half a mile. And that's it. That's all she says. And then she presumably like drops a scroll, and the scroll like falls to the ground, that is like filled up with writing from Longaville. And we laugh with her, right? We laugh at Longaville, but we laugh with Maria, because her language strikes at the heart of what is ridiculous about him in so few words, and in such simple terms. It's not only accessible to us, but it like invites us to join her in the mockery. And we realize how the princess and her ladies are operating on this this intellectual level that the boys can't reach, because there's actual like elegance in the simplicity of the way that they talk. They cut to the heart of things faster than the men, and in so doing, they sort of the women just come across as so much more intelligent, which is for the boys really difficult to like wrestle with, because they're trying so hard to prove that they're smart, and the ladies aren't out to prove anything really with the way that they speak. And so at one point, Barone speaks a whole sonnet to Rosaline, and it's one of his most emotionally vulnerable moments in the play. And it ends with a line that includes the word sans, like S-A-N-S, which is like minus or like subtracting. And he just delivers this whole speech to her. And at the very end of it, she goes, sans, I pray you. Like, take away the super fancy way of saying subtract. Like, that's it. That's her response. It's like 4 words. 5 words. I can do math. And so that happens many times in the play, where the courtiers will go up against each other. And even if you don't quite know what they're saying, you can understand the intellectual superiority of the women just based on how little they say and how much more effective their words are. You know?
I do.
Yeah. So do you have a favorite? I mean, we know you love our motto. Did you love him? Like, were you a heart attached to him before you played him?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I didn't have a clue.
Okay.
I mean, I read it, but like reading things for graduate school and reading things as an actor are 2 different things.
Yeah, no, sure. So so what do you love about him?
I love that he tries hard, even though he doesn't understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Even though he does understand what's going on in real broad terms, but he doesn't get the specifics at all.
Yeah.
So the delight of that character is that he's not from there, and he doesn't understand how they do things around here. He knows how they do things sort of poetically, like how people ought to do things poetically, how to fall in love and how to be a friend. He knows all of those kinds of things, and but he doesn't know how the language works. Mm-hmm. He really wants to, and he really lays it out there, but he doesn't know. Mm-hmm. So his language is full of these malaprops, misused language, where he uses a word he thinks is correct, and it is 100% incorrect. Mm-hmm. And he does it, unlike so Dogberry is the other Shakespearean character who does this. Yeah. I mean, there are several, but like he's the one that's known, and it just has a different spirit than Dogberry does. It's very it's more malleable and just joyful, and he doesn't really care if he gets it wrong, and that's part of the fun. And part of the fun is that he really just likes touching other people. He really does.
He's the definition this is like of touchy-feely.
He is touchy. He just loves to touch. He loves people, and he loves to touch people. He loves to feel close to them. And like one of the things, so I will get political for 30 seconds.
Good.
But like that's one of the things that I think is so strange about watching this play when it is well done in the current era where no one can touch anyone. And I don't mean just from the COVID side. I mean like This is a play that is about familiarity, not just Armados, but with the four guys together and the four women together. It's about familiarity. It's about touch and community and all of that, those expressions
Yeah.
that in our public life these days have been taken off limits for some very good reasons.
Yep.
In spots, but it plays with the opposite of that sort of social alienation, and I like that a lot too.
That's great. Well, and I was talking with a theater director recently, and she and I were talking about restoration comedy. And she mentioned that characters in the restoration plays, for those of you who don't know, I actually like restoration drama more than many Shakespeare plays and a lot of Shakespeare's contemporaries. That's kind of where my heart is in that 1660 to 1710 range. In restoration comedy, she said characters use language as pepper spray. And I loved that. It's such a beautiful, evocative way to describe the way that they wield and weaponize language against each other as a way of protecting their hearts, right? As a way of putting forth the image that they are emotionally invulnerable. And for all of Shakespeare's for all the problems I have with him in terms of like racism and sexism and what have you, like there are a few ways in which I think he really gets at the heart of what it means to be a person. And one of the ways that he was so insightful is that young people, for the most part, and when I say young, I mean like 15 to 25. I mean like young people whose frontal lobes are still developing. He understood on a profound level that they are terrified of falling in love. That even as much as they may want it, that it is scary as hell to open up your heart to someone else. Like he got that in a way that a lot of writers just don't. And even today. And so with Love's Labors, like of course the boys have this they have this endeavor, this academic endeavor that they have committed to. But I think that their commitment to their oath of like, we're not going to see women, we're not going to indulge, we're going to be ascetic, scholars. Like, I think a part of that is the fact that these young men are so insecure and they are so afraid of seeming, emotionally vulnerable or having to like run the risk of tripping over their words that have always come easily to them. Like they're so afraid of looking stupid or looking like an idiot. Because on some level, we all know deep down in our hearts that to be in love, you have to look like an idiot. And you're going to say the wrong thing sometimes. And I think that, like Shakespeare just, like, got that. And so even when the women and men in this play, even the ladies, there are moments where you get the sense that, like, the princess and Rosaline in particular are using language as pepper spray. They're like, oh, we're just going to, like, keep you at arm's length with this like, witty piece of repartee. And you're like, oh, they're just as scared. They're just as afraid of showing how they really feel. And I love LLL. I think it is a play about youth, and I think that if you don't approach it that way in production, if you don't invest in the youth of these 8 young people, and their the fact that they are new to the world in many ways, and that they are new to the experience of love, and that love is knocking them on their asses. I think if you don't really invest in that, I think you're missing the point. And that's why I think that they're not just jerks, Jeremy, is I think there's a lot more going on.
And I will say, so this is a point where I sort of think I could disagree with you about the youth part of it in particular. I do think there, because of the Gray's Inn piece, and because of the actors who are available, when you're seeing for women in particular, you're be seeing young boys. You're seeing youth. I agree with that part. Where I have seen some successful productions is in actors who play, say, 35 to 45. Particularly on the women's side, because you're putting and say 25 to 35 on the men's side, because this is sort of I don't think I disagree with maybe the original intent, but what I think is, I had a boss once say, to me, you're not grown until you're 30, And I think that is true. And particularly today, I mean, we just see sort of immature adolescent male behavior until 30 and sometimes way past that. And you can still play with you can still play with that idea despite if the actor is not 16. And part of this is that I think in the Elizabethan period they just grew up earlier. I just think they grew up earlier. Their education prepared them for things earlier on, and so their whatever it is, 17-year-old is our 28-year-old, or is our 32-year-old. And on the women's side, I think it's just a little bit, and you can play with that maturity thing with a set of older actors too. I mean, I don't think they're senior citizens, but I think you can play with middle age there some and still get at the same sort of things you're talking about.
You could, but I find the play less less inviting and less like optimistic, or I suppose more cynical, because I want to believe that these 8 courtiers are capable of growing and developing. They're capable of all of them, even the women, because the women can be cruel and mocking in the same way as the boys. They have more restraint, and they certainly have more perspective, but I would argue that they are still fledgling in the way that the boys are in how they understand the world and how emotionally articulate they are. I think it takes everything Rosaline's got to face Barone at the end of this play. I really, really do. I think she should be shaking. She's so scared. And if they are older, if they're played 35 to 40, the 8 of them, like I don't believe that there's ever going to be that reunion or reconciliation, and I want to believe in at least the possibility. I'm not saying I want. It's not like I want to go away being like, oh, they're definitely getting married in a year, but I want to go away thinking like it's possible.
Oh, sure. They could. Having directed a production like this, I know it's possible.
Yeah.
I do.
But I don't know. I maybe this is because I'm young. Maybe this is my own sort of innate ageism, sort of like spilling out, and I don't mean to say that actors that are over the age of 30 can't do wonders with this play. Obviously they have in the past and they will continue to. I'm just not interested in that dramatically as much as I am in watching actual kids that I would be like, I would believe that you go to UCLA, right? Like I would believe that you're on spring break from college using your daddy's credit card. And that the ending of this play has the feeling as if like the Secret Service agent comes in and is like, your father, the senator, has been assassinated. Like, you got to come home. Like, breaks over.
I think some of what you're saying there, I think you're right. And in terms of like how it is, I think I always wonder, like, how are we supposed to think about this play? What are we supposed to think about this play? And the supposed to think here for me is less about age and more about conservatism. And
that's fair.
It's informed by the production I've told you about now a couple times. Like I saw, this was not long ago, I saw a production of Love's Labor's Lost at Liberty University, and my expectations were too high because I hoped that they would understand that the play is speaking about them to them, and they're college age kids, and also like, there are 65-year-olds who run that place who haven't gotten it yet. And part of what I think of the beauty of the play and the shock of the play is it's a defibrillator. Yeah, it's that is meant to like, no, they're not on this trajectory. No, in fact, they're on the opposite trajectory. The last thing we saw was all 8 of these people treating the below stairs characters not well at all. None of them, not even the women.
No, because they're allowing it to happen.
That's all.
They're
and
not.
Here comes this shock. It's the assassination. It's the like confrontation with mortality.
Yes.
And that's what turns it and makes this play that is headed in the wrong direction maybe head in the right direction. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And so I've seen I've seen one sterling production of this play, and it's the production that I'm super grateful for, because I now know that it's possible for this play to be what I always sort of like saw the potential for when I read it. Like this, I have a very strange relationship with this play, and until 2018, I had a very strained relationship with this play, because I would read it over and over again and be like, wow, I love this. I see so much, like, I see these characters, I know them, I see how this plays out, like, I love it. I love what this play has to say, and what it could, suggest about, sorry, Jeremy, young people, and how we love and how we think about ourselves and all of that. And I saw so many productions from ages like 16-ish to when I was, sort of in undergrad. I saw so many productions, and I was like, oh, this is so dissatisfying. And it was typically dissatisfying for one of two reasons. And that had to do with the spectrum of comedy to tragedy. So some productions would lean too far into like the broad slapsticky humor, of which there is a lot in this play. But productions would spend too much time like reveling in that and allowing the audience to like be in stitches from laughter, but have there be very little emotional resonance or emotional connection between the characters. Like that, the romance stuff, no, it's all fake. It's all fake. It's all farce. So I saw productions like that, and so at the end, when you have this volte-face, this changed tragedy, and the women say goodbye, and it's become super mournful. I just never bought it, and I didn't care. I didn't care about the separations because the play hadn't invited me to care or to believe in the love between any of them, or even in the friendships themselves, right? So I saw those productions, and then the other productions I saw, kind of what you were speaking to earlier, but probably done worse, were the productions that were like, we got a foreground that this isn't going to end well, because if we don't do that, then we've like failed. I don't know why you would get that. I mean, I get that some people want consistency, but like, you can't. I think it's really hard to play the first 9.
Yes.
I think it's hard to play.
Most directors are idiots. That's the answer.
Okay.
Most
well, that's
directors
not.
are...
I don't endorse that, but fine. That is the opinions expressed on the show do not reflect the opinions of Sweet Tea Shakespeare. But I would see the productions that were like, we gotta show that this is going to end badly. So the relationships between the 8 of them would be super cynical, right? The men would just be objectifying the women, and the women would just be like mean and petty. And so you just had no reason to care about the 8 of them because they were all just horrible and irredeemable. And then like the below stairs characters were used. We weren't allowed to like laugh at the antics. We were just invited to like look at how stupid they were. And so these really like dark, mean-spirited productions. And then the news came in that the father died. And at that point, I was like, just end the play. I just wanted it to be over. And so it wasn't until I saw Amanda Dennart's 2008 production at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which had this whole like score of original music that characters would sing. There was a live band on stage. The set itself was like, it was like a nursery. It was like a child's nursery, not in terms of the aesthetic of the architecture, but it was filled with objects that you would find in a kid's nursery, but like adult size. So there was like a rocking horse, and there were like balloons, and there were like things that kids would play with, and the characters would run around grabbing these items, and they would use them to illuminate some of the more dense and like oblique jokes in the play. Like they would use these objects to like help us understand what they were talking about. But the most important thing was that they had these eight young actors as the leads, and the production was like, look at how hard they're trying to protect themselves because they are falling in love with each other. Like that was what we were continually invited to see over and over again. Is it was like they were falling hard for each other, and they were using wit and language and all of their learning and intellect to like guard their hearts because they were so afraid of being the first one to say, I like you. And it was so precious. And because of that, all the boys' antics became endearing, and all of the girls' like pranks became like heartwarming because we saw what they couldn't see, which is that these feelings were mutual and that they were all scared. And it was just like, it was still funny, and the moments of comedy were still allowed to be comical, but there was this emotional truth sort of undergirding everything. and the music really highlighted that. Like the scene where after the princess found out that her father had died, she stripped down in front of the entire audience in a spotlight, just crying, mascara like coming down her face. She like undressed in front of us, just moment of pure, literal, physical vulnerability. And they came and put the black dress and the crown on her. And during that time, Barone and Rosaline sang a duet, this like beautiful duet. That was really soft and sweet, like think in the way of like Once, like the musical Once, like kind of that sort of music. They sang a duet, and they couldn't look at each other. Like one would look at the other, and the other one like could not look back at them, and then they would look, and then it was like, so like as we're seeing the princess have this whole emotional experience, we're also seeing Barone and Rosaline sing a song together, but like they can't even allow themselves to look at each other because they know it's going to hurt so much. It was so good, and it was the first time that I was like, oh, so that's how you split the difference. That's how you find your way to the tragic conclusion, to the separation being meaningful and sort of heartbreaking, but also like allowing the comedy to live. And when you direct it, like I don't know if you had like a way into the text, or if you had like, if you were thinking about genre, but I would love to hear what it was like for you to kind of bring it to life.
So I think this is true. Even though I have a strong will in the room as in terms of rehearsal, I don't think there's a way. In fact, I personally push back to like I have a read on this play and this is it. I may have a read on this play, but I try intentionally not to say this is it.
Sure.
And so it's much more like, okay, who are these 8 actors that I'm going to be able to get to assemble this thing, and what kind of story are they going to be able to tell? And that applies to whatever. So and I don't mean to high actors who have ever worked for me. It's not about like, it's never about insufficiency. It's always about like, okay, what are your strengths? What are you going to be able to pull off here? And is therefore the production going to have to like massage itself this way in order for this way to work? And I'm not always great at that, but like that's it's a way. And so what I knew I wanted in the production we did, I don't know, it's like 4 years ago or something, but 4 or 5 years ago, was like the gut punch of the end. That was what I cared about. Yeah. It is almost, for me, the play is almost entirely about form. You're talking about the lyric year.
Yeah.
It's almost entirely about form, as in the like, how many syllables can I get out of my mouth?
Yeah.
How many stanzas of this poem can I write?
Yeah.
How many, like what are the rules of falling in love? Let me follow those or not follow those. And like, and frankly, I understand, even though I disagree, I understand how you could look at all of that stuff as a reader or an audience member or a director and be completely turned off by it.
Yeah.
Because there is a sort of invitation there. Like when we type the play tomorrow, I'm going to suggest that it's a 1 because it likes rules. The play likes rules. It likes structure. But then
until it doesn't.
The secret of it is like, nope, first it's like there's the moment of chaos in the 9 Worthies, and then it is a gut punch that is supposed to rip your heart out.
Yeah.
And make you confront that, and as I say, sort of shock you back into, no, you haven't been a human being this whole time. Here's your chance. Here's the opportunity.
God, I love this play.
Someone died. You're going to have to throw out the rule book now because it's not going by the book anymore. And you do, I think, at the end of that play, see a glimpse of what it means to come back together. And the thesis of the play for me is Don Armado's final line. The words of Mercury are harsh after the songs of Apollo. You that way, we this way, which is something like, and I actually love the last line of you that way, we this way, as an opportunity to speak to the audience, as in, you all have to leave now. We actors and characters are going a different direction than you are. We have to. But that words of Mercury are harsh after the songs of Apollo is this upside down thing,
Yeah.
where because he doesn't quite get it right, but the idea here is that we don't have um, like there is nothing I can say that is going to make this moment better. And this sort of bittersweet song about winter and spring has just happened, and it's like pulling at your heartstrings. And he knows he's at the limits of language, but he's saying this thing about this rule book being through. It's hard to explain, but I think when it's done right, it's about this. Here we are, arrived at this moment that none of us can really explain, but if it's going to work, it's going to require change, and that's kind of how I approach it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, it's also interesting. Like we talked about the limitations of language. The princess can't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be reading for the princess in our reading because she is the one that resonates the most with me. And she's not the Shakespeare character that I feel most like at all. But I understand her. I understand her on a profound level, and part of that comes right at the end. Right after Mercade leaves, she jumps right into action. She doesn't say anything about how she feels. She says, "All right, pack up. We're leaving. We're going back to France." And Ferdinand's like, "No, stay." And she's like, "I said get ready. I said get ready to leave. We're leaving." And I know that because I've been her in that moment. I've done that song and dance. I have you when your heart is breaking. For me, if emotional vulnerability is the scariest thing you can imagine, when your heart is breaking, you just wall it off and you just do tasks. And I get it. And she has a pretty legitimate reason to do. I mean, she's the Queen of France now. She has responsibilities. But of course, King Ferdinand is the king of a kingdom, and he's been avoiding his responsibilities. Like, she could take a moment and just feel, but she doesn't let herself do it. And she certainly doesn't let herself do it in front of this man that has come to have this massive crush on. And so she says, like, that's it, we're leaving. And Ferdinand has this really just, oh my God, it breaks me every time. He has this really weird monologue where he tries to get her to stay. And it is incomprehensible. Like, it's just terrible.
It's like watching Michael Scott on The Office.
Yes. No,
it's that sort of tone deaf, weird, awkward.
And as someone who babbles, I get it. He circles back on himself. He contradicts himself. He uses lots of weird metaphors. Barone, his best friend, has to step up and be like, okay, so what he's trying to say, is that we want to help you. We want to be with you. We want to emotionally commune with you during this time of grief. And she just has sort of sat there listening, and she just says, I understand you not. My griefs are double. She doesn't talk about her grief, but she's like, you're making it worse. You're just stop. I can't
And the thing about that moment, I think, is that Barone is actually doing it right. He's good.
Yeah.
He does the thing that you're supposed to do in that moment, and it still doesn't work. You know what I mean?
It's interesting though that you find the thesis of the play in that final moment with Armado. I mean, I suppose you've played him, and it does close out the play, so I can understand how you might come there. But for me, the play, if we think of the play as being in a telescope, right, with lenses, even as much as I love the play, it doesn't actually come into focus for me until Rosaline says to Barone, "A jest's prosperity lies in the ear of him that hears it, never in the tongue of him that makes it." Because she is the Barone of her friend group. And that's not just because she falls in love with Barone and has a romance with him. It's because she's the wisecracker. She's in many ways the smartest, sharpest. We get the feeling she's kind of the worldliest of the ladies, in the same way that Barone seems to have he's a better understanding about human desire and lust in a way that his friends seem to not quite understand yet. She has a similar ethos in the group of ladies where she just has an awareness that they're lacking. And she's perhaps the most she has the sharpest tongue, let us say. When she mocks all the way. To the point of perhaps being a little thoughtless sometimes and a little bit cruel. And she kind of enjoys that she can be cruel. And in many ways, that is why her her repartee with Barone, I see that as just like Shakespeare testing out the chemistry that he will later perfect with Benedict and Beatrice. She has a lot of Beatrice-ness in her. But when she faces Barone at the end of the play, all of the couples by that point all of the ladies have said, I'm not accepting your proposal. We're going to spend a year apart. I'm giving you something to do that will make you a better person. I have stuff to do, and we will meet in a year, and we'll see what happens then. All of the couples have already had that. And Barone and Rosaline come together last, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think Shakespeare is telling us something about both of them. I think that he's also saying, like, look at how hard they're avoiding each other, even in this moment. But they come together, and what she tells him to do, which is still so fascinating to me, is she doesn't say study, just study. She says, you have this wit. You have this ability to use your words on the fly and be this kind of amazing improv artist, basically, and make people laugh. But you're always wielding that power to make yourself seem smart. You're not doing it for the benefit of the people listening. You're doing it for the benefit of yourself. And she says, what I want you to do is I want you to take a year, and I want you to visit hospitals, and I want you to go visit sick and dying people who are disenfranchised and disempowered in a way that you cannot even fathom, Mr. Elite Courtier who's had an Oxford education. I want you to go to visit them. And she's like, I want you to use your wit to make them laugh, make them smile. I want you to make them happy. And I don't want the jokes to be about making yourself look smart. I want it to be about making them and making their lives better. And he's like, well, that's impossible. You can't make sick and dying people laugh. And she's like, no, that's why we as humans have the ability to make each other laugh. It's to give joy, not to attain glory. and in when she tells him, a jest's prosperity, like a jest's success, lies in the ear of him that hears it, never in the tongue of him that makes it. I just feel like, despite the fact that she is speaking to like the whole premise of the play, she is speaking to the boy's narcissism in many ways. I have to believe in that moment she is also talking to herself. That she is like, even though she's giving him this task, she's also saying it and realizing it in real time of like, oh, that's right. It's not about being the smartest one in the room. And if you want to be in love, you have to be ready to not be the smartest person in the room. When we tell jokes, which she and Barone are jokesters, they're jesters. When we tell jokes, it has to be about giving joy and delight to the people around us. That has to be the purpose of it. Otherwise, it's artificial. And that to me is like when those lenses like they turn and suddenly like the whole play sort of comes into focus. Because I think if you have the right actress playing Rosaline, and if you set it up right, I just think that moment is a moment of self-revelation as much as it is a moment of instruction for him. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think it's so powerful. Is I think the women see the opportunity for themselves to get better as well. And I think the princess goes through. I think she really does. I think she's crippled by guilt in that last scene, despite the fact that like she in many ways has been the most mature of the bunch, and she has a lot going for her. But in that last scene, I think she's like, what the hell have I been doing here? What have I let myself get sucked into while my dad is sick at home? How dare I have fun? How dare I enjoy this when that was happening back home? And I think that even though Ferdinand is a bumbling mess with her, like I think that she also is just mad at herself. It's not just anger at him, it's anger at herself of like, this is my fault. And I never get to make amends, and I never get to say goodbye, because I was here mocking, like having fun mocking these young law students instead. And I think that there has to be a mutual recognition that they all have growing to do, as opposed to just like the boys are jerks and the girls have all the like smarts and know-how, and they're like, fix yourselves and then we'll get married. That's less interesting to me than it being that ending being a moment of everyone going, wow, we're such wrecks. We have so much work to do.
All right.
So when you directed it, did you actually use the spring and winter song at the end?
No, we replaced it with a song from Once, actually.
Okay. Yep.
I think Elizabethan songs are weird,
They are. I
and
agree.
they're mostly turnoffs, and I would like to replace them in the way that, I mean, like, he was using modern music, his modern music,
Sure.
his top 40 or whatever. We kind of do the same as much as, like,
Uh-huh.
that's what I try. Because I think for me, it's like, it goes back to that. Okay, what are we supposed to be feeling right here? And is that what that does? Or would there be a different kind of shortcut, which I think is what all music in Shakespeare is about, is a shortcut
Yep.
to, I need to get you to this emotional place.
Yes.
And we got to do it in a hurry. And so, yeah, we used a song from Once in a
Yeah.
little like movement sequence. And it did the trick for me. I don't know about anybody else. I don't put out audience surveys after my shows, so I don't know what people thought.
That's fine. Do you have a favorite moment or a favorite line?
Yeah, I do have a favorite. I have a favorite. Actually, so I played Don Armado in grad school. I can't remember the moment, but it was exactly. But it was during the Nine Worthies, and somebody, one of the lords says something to Armado. I can't remember what it is. And I found myself on stage in performance, like sort of in a zone, not knowing what I was supposed to, like, not knowing what the choice was before me. Like, I was actually and I just said the line in whatever my response was, which is something like, yes. I mean, it was like something simple like that. And I just did this. It was like this whole body takeover. And I just said it. And for whatever reason, the entire audience like split into laughter for reasons I didn't even understand. That was a lot of fun. But my favorite line is when Armado's with Holofernes and others, and he's talking about his friendship with the king, and it says,
Friendship.
"The king is a noble gentleman and my familiar, and for what is inward between us, let that pass." And he talks about I can't remember. I will know it by Saturday, but dally with my excrement with my mustachio. He's talking about, and he doesn't mean excrement at all, but he says that word, and dally with my excrement. It's like one of those things. So in Shakespeare plays, they're so weird. There's just weird turns of phrases that happen all the time, and it's almost like he took a bet at the bar, and like, I will get the phrase dally with my excrement into this play on a dare.
Yeah.
And then he does it.
Totally.
And so
I think he lost a bet to someone named Antonio really early in his life, and the bet was that he had to put him in like a bunch of plays.
Yeah, and
like
pirates.
They had some sort of gambling disaster, and he was like, "All right, you got like 5 plays. I got it. My name has to appear in 5 of them, or something like that." I feel like that probably happened at some point. That's good. That's a good moment. It's a good line. I think that I cut in the script that we're doing on Saturday. It's a shortened version because, my God, this play is long. But I think I cut the part about the let us pass. I think I jumped a little bit further in speech, but you do get the dally with excrement line because it's just, it's just amazing. And yeah, that's part of Armado's charm. It's like it's malapropisms, but like on the level of idioms. It's like Shakespeare takes the idea of the malaprop, but he doesn't just apply it to words. He applies it to like ideas, and that's part of what's so just precious about Armado.
He's playing. The other thing I love about that character, or about the way it's written, is that it is absolutely like a foreigner stereotype. I think it happens in dialect. I mean, he does this in other places too. He's got the Scots person here, or the Welsh person there, the Irish person there, the French person there, and this for me, the play Armado makes sense in dialect, and it would normally be something that you would expect to be not comfortable, not great, like you're making fun of this guy, but like the character is so delightful that even though he doesn't get everything up here, you still love him. So, and even though he's like a cutout of a foreigner in some ways, he's like, oh, actually, this is the one of all of these characters that I like the most.
And it's funny, we've been talking a lot about head and heart in this conversation without really sort of putting our finger on it. But that is, for me, that is my way into this play, is that I think that this play is about a bunch of characters who are up here and want to be up here and don't understand this at all. Mm-hmm. And are kind of afraid of this. And then when this starts acting up, this gets scared and they have to like drop down. And it's this like, I mean, that's the magic for me is the fact that like, and this is, I'm speaking as someone who really likes I'm a nerd. Like I like learning things, and I like I like books and reading and academia, and like, and I have often used wit and humor as a way to like deflect from having to get real and emotional about things. But I think that this play is about like, the language of this is messy and imperfect. It's not rhyming prose. I mean, sorry, it's not rhyming couplets. What comes out of here is messy. But what comes out of here is true. What comes out of here is only ever going to be the imitation of what is true. And like this can only get you so far. This is the key to connection. This is the key to friendship and romantic love. All of the things that sort of keep us alive. But we have to be brave enough to allow ourselves to not seem smart. And it's just a lesson that I think I will continue to need.
And I think, I mean, that points me to the last thing I would say about the play, which is I think it's about, in the way that the theater of the time is about this, in the way that the core story between the four couples is about this. If I had to pick one word that this play is about, it would be a strange word, like transmission. It's about the message that's intended versus the message that's delivered.
I really like that.
There's a whole lot of stuff I mean, this play is like almost the entire action of the play is about transmission.
Yeah.
It's this message and messenger doing this thing. There's a mistake embedded in it, or it's not delivered quite the way we want to, or it's really effective. And so, as people work on the play, read the play, watch the play, I think there are four characters you would want to focus on to unlock your understanding of it. Those are Costard, who's a transmitter, not a great one. Armato, who's a transmitter, not a great one in some ways and a great one in others.
Yeah.
Marcotti at the end, who's the transmitter of the bad news.
Yep.
And really incisive and efficient and like,
yep.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And then Boyette is the for me is the key that unlocks the whole play, and plays with this age thing, because he is I think meant to be a little older.
Yeah, I agree.
Statelier, has all more mature, knows, although he plays with that too, but and is this translator, like, not of language exactly, but of sort of behavior and the supposed to stuff that's supposed to happen.
He has that amazing,
and works between the two keys.
Yeah. He has that amazing series of rhyming couplets to the princess in that first scene after she meets the king. And I don't know if she's in denial or if she's just trying to like, or if she's just sort of doubting herself. But Boyette is the one who's like, the king is into you. Like, did you pick up on this? And she's like, what are you talking about? Of course not. And he basically goes top to bottom. He like goes from like the top of Ferdinand's head to his toe, and he's like, look at all of the behavioral things he was doing to show you that he was interested in you. And like it's berhymed and it's funny and it's so it's almost always played just to make the princess embarrassed. It's not that she's like she was oblivious. It's that she doesn't want to hear this. But there is something kind of remedial about it where he's like, are you really just gonna pretend like you didn't see his eyes looking at you in this way and his hands reaching for you in this way and his weird twitchy mouth like are you gonna pretend like you didn't see those things? And he's like a behavioral translator, and it's one of my favorite moments. I really like that. That's a word that I would never have like come up with, because it sounds a bit clinical for a play that is so flowery and kind of organic and I don't know, like outdoorsy, I suppose. But I like that a lot, and I think that those four characters represent like the north, south, east, and west of different kinds of transmission. Because Costard he's not just a bad transmitter in terms of the way he talks and like getting his point across. He also mixes up love letters. Like he's literally just he's the messenger you don't want delivering your message. And that's a really great word, like as a way of unlocking the play. I don't know if I have one like that per se. but I think of I think the head heart, the false dichotomy of the head and the heart. That's my way in. So this Saturday, Jeremy and I are getting a group together on Zoom of just amazing actors. I don't know how we landed these people, but they're brilliant, and I'm so excited to work with all of them. We are going to be reading Love's Labors, a cutting that I have done out loud and recording it, and then we're gonna strip that audio, we're gonna clean it up, we're gonna add some music, and we're gonna drop it as a podcast so that you can listen to the as Jeremy said, the audio book of this play the next time you are walking in a park.
I've been practicing my Spanish lisp for weeks.
I will not be doing a French accent, which I know is breaking hearts, but I'm just going to do this in my normal American one.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be great.
I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's a good group of people. And if you are listening and you are in the cast, thank you so much. We're deeply grateful to have you lending your voice and artistry to this project. Yeah, it's gonna be a hoot.
Speaking of hoot, that's how the play ends. There's a little owl.
It's terrible. Yes.
The cuckoo and the owl.
The cuckoo and the owl. Yep.
Woo-hoo-hoo.
Will you please do that at the end of our recording Saturday?
I absolutely 100%
bird noises.
Yep.
So yeah. Hopefully you have found some, if not gems, then pretty rocks in in this this spelunking that we have done into Love's Labors Lost. This has been really fun for both of us. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.
TTFN.
Are you gonna do our motto sign out? I think you should.
The words of Mercury are harsh after the songs of Apollo. You that way, we this way. That's all I got. I'm done. Did it.